Hey, everybody. Today, I'm asking if you like the show, would you head over to iTunes and leave a review? Just go to coolcatteacher.com/iTunes, and it will take you to the show on iTunes. And you can give it stars, or even better, if you leave a rating. It really does make a difference, and it helps other teachers find the show. Thanks. Episode 387, Are Smartphones in Classrooms a Smart Move?
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Are smartphones in the classroom a smart move? Well, today we're talking with Dr. Liz Kolb. She wrote a book in 2008 that has kind of been my guidebook. It's called Toys to Tools, Connected Student Cell Phones to Education. Liz, here we are 10 years later, and so much has changed and so much hasn't. What do you think about the state of, we're just going to call them smartphones, not cell phones, since we don't really call them cell phones anymore. What do you think about the state of phones in the classroom?
Yes, it is really fascinating to kind of look at the journey. When I wrote the book, which was around 2007, 2008, there was not one school in the United States that allowed cell phones in the school building itself. They all had policies of banning them. Now, if we look at it 10 years later, about 70% of schools have some form of an inclusive policy for cell phones, whether that means they can be in the lockers and not in the classroom, or in the classroom and used academically. It varies greatly. It's fascinating to see how schools really tried to push this tidal wave of cell phones out, keep it out the door as much as they could. And now they kind of realized that it's something that they can't keep out the door. And now they're grappling with new challenges with cell phones.
Yes. And then, of course, there's some in Silicon Valley that have made the news who say, we don't want any technology at all. I mean, do you feel like there's still some of the same conversations going on from 2008 of this is disruptive and we don't want to teach with it?
Absolutely. I think a couple of the challenges that have been brought to the forefront with this emergence of cell phones with younger and younger children is also that our teachers, one of the challenges is that our teachers are not really well prepared and trained to use cell phones academically. So we're still not seeing a lot of high quality academic use of cell phones in the classroom. It's spotty where we do see it. It's definitely something that schools really struggle with. And so I think that's the reason why we have a call, not just for community members, but also from teachers themselves, because if they don't know how to use it academically, they're frustrated that it's being distracting from the learning that's happening in the classroom, where students are pulling them out of backpacks and checking text messages. Or we've even seen research that has shown that even if a student has a cell phone next to them or even in their backpack, it can be distracting to their cognitive capacity to take in the information that's happening in the classroom. So we are seeing kind of a pushback, a lot of that having to do with teachers not really still knowing how to pedagogically use them effectively.
But would you also say, I read the other day that the only people who call their customers users are drug dealers and technologists. And that these devices are designed to be so highly addictive. And, I had a period of time where I believe I was addicted to my cell phone, that I was, looking for that phone and where is it? And I need to tweet or whatever. And I really had to grapple with that. And I'm an adult, so what do we do about the addictive nature of these devices?
Absolutely. The research has shown, especially things like social media and texting, increases kind of this feel-good dopamine in our students and in adults as well. And the concern with students is that they don't have as much impulse control, they lack that frontal lobe in their brain to stop and turn it off. So there is a concern that our students aren't able to self-regulate their use of devices. And right now, the average age of students receiving a cell phone or owning their own is around 10, which is about fifth grade for most students. And at fifth grade developmentally, they're just not ready to handle everything that's going to come at them from a smartphone. It's no longer just a phone call. There's so many different apps and applications and group texting that comes at them. And so there has been a recommendation by some different organizations and kind of mom groups, kind of a wait till eighth movement that started, where researchers are focusing on the fact that developmentally students are more ready in eighth grade, cognitively to handle learning how to self-regulate with things like cell phones.
Well, and if a school had unfiltered access to the internet and kids could look up anything at that school, parents would be up in arms. They would be protesting. They would be at school board meetings. They would do whatever it took for the school to spend money on filters. And yet I have found most students have no filter at all on their cell phones and have complete unfettered access to the internet. Is that an issue?
I think that's sort of an issue. I think it masks other issues because students are also really good at figuring out ways to get around the filter in their school. And so they're pretty savvy. And even the filters in the schools do not filter out 100% of the content that we would prefer that students do not have access to. So I think it's more about educating them how to handle the content that is coming at them rather than trying to filter it out completely. But what I have noticed in schools is that sometimes teachers will ask the students to take out their cell phones to look at a video or look at an academically appropriate website that's been filtered out. So in some ways, teachers are actually using the cell phones for good to actually access content that they need to access or different resources that are being filtered out that can be useful to learning.
The number one way they're bypassing school filters is to go on their data plan. And the other thing they're doing is I actually had some transfer students I taught a couple of years back, and they were using proxies. And I could see it on the content filter. And I was like, why are you using proxies? Oh, the teachers at our last school taught us to use a proxy so that we could get around the firewall so we could access this stuff. And it's like, oh, it just, I guess there's just so many things. I think of a young child that before the filters were really popular that came in my classroom, and their parents had gotten a llama, and they go and they type in, "I love llamas." And I immediately grabbed my notebook and put it in front of the screen because I just had a really bad feeling. And I was right of what came up. And to me, the innocence of a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, they don't really know what they're typing in sometimes. I think that's, to me, that the filter is more protecting innocent eyes who don't mean to do something than it is those who are bound and determined to hack around it.
Right. And I think those are concerns and issues that we need to consider also just about the age that we're going to have students owning their own device, because these are smart devices. There are all sorts of applications and websites that they can get into that maybe they're developmentally not quite ready to handle. So even though I may want my child to have a cell phone so I can call them or text them for communication purposes, I need to recognize that once I do hand over that device, I'm really giving them access to the world. And of course, there's wonderful things with it, but there are also areas that aren't so great. And that those are important things to consider as parents when we're doing that. And of course, in schools, they're trying to handle all of this that's really coming at them. And many schools still are just not equipped with kind of a K-12 digital literacy and digital citizenship curriculum to handle it.
Liz, here's the tough question. I mean, we can't go back. That's obvious. But do you think the world is a better place because cell phones are in the classroom?
Oh, I think with all technological progress comes challenges, but it also comes great benefits. So I think the benefits do outweigh the challenges, but I think we're in a place where we're struggling a little bit with teachers being prepared, schools being prepared, making sure that schools and parents are talking to each other about recommendations for devices and citizenship. One of the benefits I've seen with cell phones is that there's greater home-to-school communication than there's ever been before between parents and teachers and students, and communication also with high needs populations and low income populations, because they tend to have access to texting and cell phones more than landlines or basic computers. So I think, we see many benefits with them, but we also are seeing the challenges, and we'll kind of go through these bumpy roads. And I think ultimately schools will find a way to manage cell phones so that it can benefit academically.
And I'll just say, from my perspective, formative assessment and the use of smartphones has been my top advantage of having cell phones in my classroom. Things like Nearpod and Kahoot and all of these different tools, Edpuzzle, things that you can really send awesome content and check formatively, how is that knowledge forming? Are they learning? How do I need to adjust instruction? Those to me are the most useful aspects. But I also think that we really have to discuss with kids it's this addictive nature. And do you have the power to digital detox? I mean, I put my phone down every Sunday, and just to say, you know what, I have power over my phone. It doesn't have the power over me, because we all need to have, be a human being and not just a human doing all the time. So Liz, you've got a recent book out, I believe. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. I have a new book out last year called Learning First, Technology Second, and it really focuses on, we have all these technology tools now in our classrooms, but we want to make sure that our learning goals and the learning targets still come first before our technology choices, and that the technology is really enhancing the learning goals, and the technology is not really taking over the learning, so the learning and the content gets lost. Because, of course, with all these fun tools, sometimes that happens. And so I created a framework called the Triple E framework, which this book highlights, to kind of help coach teachers and administrators to make sure that when we are selecting technology, we're selecting it to benefit the learning and the learners, and not just because it's shiny and fun.
Oh, and that's such an important topic. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me, Vicki. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.